It is a truth, universally acknowledged, that a woman in possession of a YouTube channel must be in want of a Star Wars hot take. There is a game that writers and artists play in workshops in which one passes on an unfinished work of art to another artist, and then that artist has to continue it with his own vision in mind. Normally, this game is played by blindfolded writers, but with how Abrams, powered by Disney, took Rian Johnson's work, it might as well have worked that way. But I digress. We begin with the troubles of Lucasfilm and Disney during the pre-production process. During the new trilogy's conceptualization, the bare bones of Star Wars were laid out, and only the bare bones. The return of the original cast being one of them. While some major plot points were agreed upon, Disney initially left the film's destiny entirely up to chance. There was no specific direction the trilogy was to be taken if we were to believe reports, so instead 3 different teams were chosen to exercise creative freedom and choice for 3 different movies. And with that came 3 directors with varying resumes and reputations. The Force Awakens begins with none other than J.J. Abrams, the man, the myth, the legend, fresh off his less acknowledged, somewhat bland Star Trek movies, took on an even greater burden when the first movie of the new generation's childhood was thrust upon him. This Star Warial debut was very much well received by the public as it evoked 2 of Abrams' strongest points: nostalgia and mystery.
Mystery is the catalyst for imagination. Now, it's not the most groundbreaking idea, but when I started to think that maybe there are times when mystery is more important than knowledge, I started getting interested in this. And so I started thinking about Lost and the stuff that we do, and I realized, oh my God, like mystery boxes are everywhere in what I do. And how
some would call The Force Awakens as A New Hope remade, with different characters and a different villain entirely, which is relatively true, making it probably the least memorable and least controversial movie of the Star Wars trilogy, sans Rey being the only woman cast initially and them having to cast Lupita Nyong'o and Gwendolyn Christie later on. However, it's also the movies Abrams needed to write, because the movie had to reintroduce a whole new generation to the Star Wars universe and regain the trust and goodwill from a fan base burned by the prequels. An article written by Dirk Libby of Cinema Blend claimed that Abrams was the perfect man to begin the Star Wars series, because he knew how to weaponize nostalgia and intertextuality to tell a gripping tale for both old and new audiences alike. In The Force Awakens, we're reintroduced to Leia, Han, Chewie, Luke, the Millennium Falcon, Kylo Ren and his Darth Vader-esque mask, the lightsaber, and the multiple droids all in one go, while simultaneously mirroring the arc of Rey and Han Solo to Luke and Obi-Wan's from the original series. We move on to The Last Jedi, which was directed by Rian Johnson, who is known for the critically acclaimed science fiction movie Looper, released in 2012. At this point, it's important to note that Johnson was already involved with some of the Star Wars pre-planning before he went on to direct The Last Jedi. In contrast to The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi instead subverted all the expectations of what fans have for a Star Wars movie. The Resistance and the First Order get their weapons from the same dealer, Luke Skywalker banished himself to Acto out of shame, and possibly one of the most controversial moves Star Wars has done to date, they made Rey the protagonist, neither a Skywalker nor a Kenobi, but a literal nobody away from the Star Wars drama of the original series. In fact, plenty of my friends watched the movie and came out thinking that they didn't watch a Star Wars film, and I know some film critics feel the same. And that in itself makes The Last Jedi an important and standout movie of the decade. Now, whether you consider it a beloved piece of work or the most intolerable Star Wars movie ever made, one thing is for sure, you do consider it. This movie marked a change in the direction of the universe and the unraveling of ideals it created 1 to 2 decades ago. However, this change came with an intense backlash from certain sectors of the fanbase. If you check out the score of The Last Jedi on Rotten Tomatoes, you see the big disconnect between its critical and audience score. I'm not saying that wasn't to be expected, especially when you mess with Star Wars, one of the biggest universal pop culture landmarks for most fanboys and girls out there. So while The Last Jedi was appreciated by film critics and select fans alike, it was also very much hated. And while some of the criticism was valid, it also inspired the worst impulses in the far-right movement. A good chunk of those who boycotted The Last Jedi cited its political correctness and progressive values as the reason. Some went as far as to say that the presence of Star Wars' first woman of color, Kelly Marie Tran, was evidence of Rian Johnson's leftist political agenda. And by the way, I'm not discounting Lupita Nyong'o's presence, it's just that her character wasn't a black woman. I'll talk about the backlash a little later on, but right now I want to use this to jump to my real thesis statement, that Disney helped kill the creative integrity of the Star Wars franchise. As Star Wars suffered from fan backlash and a major boycott during the lull between The Last Jedi and Rise of the Skywalker, there were major emergencies happening behind the scenes, specifically the death of Carrie Fisher. Now, she was meant to play a bigger role in Rise of the Skywalker, but obviously that didn't happen. Now, not many people know this, but before Abrams came back to do Rise of the Skywalker, there was director Colin Trevorrow, who is known for directing the Jurassic Park reboots with Chris Pratt. It's important to note that Trevorrow was not part of the initial brainstorming process. However, he had already begun writing his script for what was supposed to be the 9th installment of the Star Wars trilogy, and so began the disconnect between the director and the producer. And while Trevorrow's vision was initially accepted by Disney President Alan Horn and Disney CEO Bob Iger, the script drafts he was submitting were not up to the standards set in the prior meetings. Reports then said that Disney hired Jack Thorne, the writer of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, to try and help Trevorrow with the rest of the script, but that didn't work either. So then Trevorrow was, foregoing all graceful terms for it, fired from Rise of the Skywalker and was replaced with Abrams, who, as we know, was immersed in the conceptualization of this new trilogy from the very beginning. He brought along screenplay writer Chris Terrio, known for his work in Batman vs. Superman, Justice League, and Argo. Now, as to what happened to Trevorrow's script, you should note that they technically got writing or story credit at the end of The Rise of the Skywalker. However, reports show that almost nothing was used from his script, although I'm not quite sure what was contained in that script. I've yet to find reliable articles for that. So what resulted was an extremely baffling, incoherent, and divisive storyline that failed with the critics but boomed with a good chunk of the audience. And while J.J. Abrams denies ever feuding with Rian Johnson, The Rise of the Skywalker did spend a good chunk of its time invalidating the work done to the Star Wars universe in The Last Jedi. Now, no one but God and J.J. Abrams himself can ever give a proper reason as to why that happened. However, I, as well as a lot of critics and fans, am prone to believe that a lot of these changes occurred because of the backlash that The Last Jedi faced after its 2017 release. I said in this essay that The Last Jedi was a highly controversial film. Breaking the mythos of Star Wars was a risky feat and not without its consequences. Other than the bad audience ratings on Rotten Tomatoes, the cast and crew of Star Wars experienced an influx of internet trolls. Now, I want you to note that internet trolls is different from the racist and sexist hot takes I mentioned earlier in this essay. Trolls are meant to attack, scare, harass, and destroy certain figures by bombarding them directly, and that's the key word here, directly, with non-stop hate. It is an organized and sometimes paid hate crime. In this case, Kelly Marie Tran, who played Rose, was driven off social media last June 2018 after enduring months of vitriolic comments from scorned fanboys and right-wing extremists alike. It doesn't take a critic to see how the creative decisions made in The Rise of the Skywalker were safe and careful ones. Plenty of the plot points from The Last Jedi were retconned. Rose's role in The Rise of the Skywalker was reduced from her role in The Last Jedi, and she was made to be an expandable side character. Rey went from being a nobody to the granddaughter of Palpatine, who was never mentioned before The Rise of the Skywalker, and the sacrifice of Luke Skywalker was made insignificant as no one else outside the Skywalker family ended up controlling the Force. Sorry, Broomboy and Finn, your force sensitivity was practically useless in the Rise of the Skywalker. Now, this is the Disney monopoly at work. I don't want to go into details about the monopoly, given the tens and thousands of videos out there on the internet explaining why Disney acquiring most creative and distribution rights in the film industry is bad. However, I do want to use the creative failure of Star Wars as a franchise, as well as the neoliberalist practices behind the scenes, as an example of how the monopoly fails the very core and integrity of the franchise. Now, I am pretty sure that there are people out there who may call me out for my complete inability to talk about Star Wars without inserting my own principles and values. However, I will still talk about my personal principles and values because I am at least confident in their validity. There comes a point where media students become cynical of the industry they planned on working in. I, at 17, was a dewy-eyed broadcast communication student that dreamt of entering the film and news industry. However, it became pretty evident early on that however determined I was and however determined my classmates were in changing the world, there was always the risk that I would be swallowed by the big capital S system. And therein lies my point. No matter how progressive directors, writers, DPs, actors are, they are always working within the limitations of a certain social, political, and capitalistic norm. That's not to say that they're bad people, because there are creatives who manage to push the standards and create meaningful content that challenges the system despite working within it. However, it does mean that plenty of big, bold, and radical ideas have to shrink to fit the neat box of appropriateness and profit of companies like Disney. The point is, the creative failure of Star Wars, because of Disney's monopoly, is super unsurprising, given the way media is rooted in, apparently my favorite word on this channel, capitalism. I could go into the nitty-gritty details of it, but basically everything is profit-driven in this industry. Content needs to make its money back because it pays for the time and labor of those involved in its making, and it also fills the pockets of those who get to dictate where the money and creative direction goes. But since Disney, the monopoly, is currently on top of everything and owns essentially triple anything any of the executives will need in their lifetime, they should be able to, feel safe enough to allow the directors and creatives to push boundaries without suffering much of a profit loss. Right? Oh, wrong. Since the Star Wars reboot in 2015, Disney has exercised a tight control over this particular franchise. The drama with Trevorrow and Abrams is only one of the many production disasters Star Wars faced. The standalone film Rogue One experienced serious reshoots and re-edits during its third act, when Disney executives were dissatisfied with its first draft. And Solo, A Star Wars Story, was an even messier one, with Disney firing its original directors Phil Lord and Christopher Miller for Ron Howard mid-production because of creative differences. Now, I'm not saying that Disney trying to prioritize ratings, profit, time, and efficiency is any big conspiracy. If anything, that would be saying stuff like water sweat. And technically, there is nothing illegal with companies choosing to let go of certain employees if they're not reaching a certain degree of standards. However, we have to acknowledge that Disney letting their directors and creatives go for quote-unquote creative differences when they were asking for unique viewpoints, as well as the frequency of it happening, becomes concerning. But I'm not surprised. The Star Wars universe was an incredibly lucrative and profitable one, and Disney knew that when it bought into Lucasfilms in 2012 for $4 billion. It was a beloved name with a famous stable of characters and one of the most dedicated and loyal fan bases at the time. By buying it, it guaranteed people in the movie theater regardless of quality, well, at least initially. And because of that, Disney tries to keep its audience hooked with very safe storylines that don't mess with the status quo and mess with what they know. It's not that they're bad movies, it's just that they're very safe ones. Even with the promise of unique viewpoints and takes, it's pretty clear that Lucasfilms and Disney hold the bulk of creative control, and this is why I have a very complex relationship with The Rise of the Skywalker. I don't think it's a horrible movie. There are some objectively redeemable components of the film, such as the choreography of the fight scenes and even the arc of Ben Solo. not counting that Reylo kiss. I do hold a lot of resentment for it, however, because it is possibly one of the worst things a Star Wars movie can be. It goes against everything that the Star Wars franchise calls for. Bravery, change, difference. The movie is cowardly. It goes back to what it knows best, which isn't terrible, but it's just safe. And some people may not find that bad, but I also think it's so much worse than what it could have been, away from the monopoly that is Disney. Hey guys, happy 2020 and Ika here. Thank you so much. I just want to say it. For the 1,000 subscribers, it is an amazing thing to ever experience, and I didn't even expect to experience it so early on into this venture of mine. I know that I'm nowhere near some of the bigger names, and my production quality isn't exactly always perfection, but thank you. I hope you're having a wonderful day, because I know that I'm having a wonderful day. I don't know if I have anything for coffee out right now. I was absolutely killed during December and the start of January, but I will promise to get back into the grind soon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!